And
On
so
the board.
he plays b6?
Jan spots it. He spots the queen sacrifice. Are we going to see that happen?
So it was the fourth tiebreak game between Ding Liren and Jan Nepomniachtchi that stole the headlines because Ding won it with black, became world champion. But this was probably my favourite of all four games because it was just an epic back and forth struggle, so typical of the match, featuring as well this crazy queen sack line, which is just beautiful. So I'll pause at the moment that comes and replay the reaction for you. So let's have a look at this. Game one of the tiebreaks. It's rapid play chess. Ding kicks off here with pawn d4. And as we saw so often in the match, Ding just mixes up the openings. So he goes pawn c3 here. Remember, we saw bishop f4, a London. We saw e3, a Collie system. What's he got in mind here? Well, after c5, he takes on c5. And then when Jan goes e6, preparing to recapture the pawn, well, Ding holds onto it. But not via b4, by the way. If you try and do it like this, then you get the typical kind of undermining stuff. And after this point here, if you try and hold on to the pawn now after taking, well, then you can't do so because as bishop takes with check, you're not in time to recapture or you lose the rook. So b4 is not the way to hold on, but bishop e3 is what Ding goes for. Now it looks like you're running straight into knight g4, but that's impossible immediately because check and then you win the knight. So coming back here, we just see bishop e7, now g3, logical development. I mean, the bishop's not coming this way, right, with the bishop on e3 and everything. We see knight c6, bishop g2, and now with the diagonal blocked from the check, it looks like you can go knight g4, start picking this one up. But I don't want to go down that whole line because we see it in the game a few moves later. So castles, b4 was now played, now we get knight g4 and bishop d4 is the idea. Now you're running into e5, right? But again, I'll show the game continuation because we get two more moves inserted and now this pawn e5 idea. But here's the response from white. Pawn h3, counter-attacking on this knight, which is defending the pawn. Now, if you drop back, which is playable, well then the bishop drops back to e3, you know, the knight no longer attacks it, game goes on, different position. But what we see in the game is captures on d4, takes on g4, and now takes on c3. Now that pawn was immediately recaptured. But if you go a3, by the way, to protect this chain, you know, get the connect 3, well then you can go d4 as black. And it's a really nice pawn sack idea because although you give this one up, well then black can go pawn c2. Now the queen can't take or you drop a piece, and if the knight recaptures, which is forced, then you hit this diagonal with the bishop, rook a2 played, you know, this knight's blocking in the rook, and now bishop e6 is coming. You actually start with rook d8 first, because now there's no bishop d5, or you take and you run into this one, picking up the rook at the end of the line, and after the queen moves away, well then bishop e6, you're picking up an exchange, better for black. So coming back here, that's why no pawn a3 immediately played. Instead, we see the knight captures on c3. This knight takes on b4, and now a3, very standard idea, drive away the knight, pick up the pawn. So what does Jan do? Well, bishop f6, counter-attack on this knight here. And again, an interesting line to show. If you take, bishop takes, rook b1, well a5 is actually really good for black. You start breaking up these pawns, lots of play, open board for the bishops. So instead, we didn't see this knight captured. We see rook c1. Now bishop takes on c3. The rook recaptures and the knight hops back to c6. And although black gave up the bishops, it was the best way to play because this knight had that big threat to take on d5. Now the queen takes on d5 instead, and bishop captures on g4. So the material is restored, but white's got the pressure here, and Ding starts to pile it on now with this move, knight to g5. So he's got a simple idea now. Nudge the queen back, attack this pawn, threaten mate, and also attack this unprotected bishop. And it's not so easy to defend against that. You know, if you go queen e5, we just chop and then we pick up this pawn. So what do we see Jan do? Well, he goes h6, preparing to kick that knight. Now it does move away. Queen e4 was also possible actually, still threatening this bishop. You'd see this kind of exchange, but we'll stick with the game. This is a great move, and that knight is heading for d6, a real octopus. And there was this chance now for black to take the pawn, and this is actually the computer's favourite way to play. But it's very computer-esque because the knight now lands on d6, and because you never activated this rook, well, after a line like this, the rook's going to sit in front of the knight, be less active on that square. Classic kind of computer defence, unafraid. What does Jan do, however? Well, he immediately activates the rook. Because now when this knight lands on d6, well, the rook's not squashed in, it can lift up the board. And that's what we now see. So Ding protects this pawn. We see rook e5, lifting into the game, kicking the queen. And now this isn't the most precise move. We get rook d8, very natural. But the computer actually wanted this bishop h3, tricky line, decoying this one to attack this dangerous knight, etc. But okay, logical from Jan. Now we see the knight jump into d6, and here the rook, it swings over, best move. If you try b6, then there's this awesome line. You can actually capture that pawn. Although you give up a knight, after queen recaptures, rook takes, can you see the move here that just wins the game for white on the spot? And there is only one move to play that keeps that big advantage. And the move is pawn b7, and you just can't stop this pawn going through. You know, there's tons of pressure on the knight and everything like that, and if it drops back here, well, we just check, the king goes, we pick up, material's restored, and there's this crazy dangerous pawn. As we can see, white is winning. So no b6 on the board, rook h5 played, and now here Ding, he goes wrong. So what he should do is queen c2. It's the top move. You come off this d line, you protect this pawn some more, look down the c file, you know, if ever b6 and captures, you're looking at this knight, and importantly, you keep this rook on f1. So now if knight e5, you can go f4, and there's no tricks here, you know, you've got two pieces defending that square. But what do we see in the game? Well, rook b1. Jan has set a trap, and Ding's run into it. Because now after knight to e5, there's no pawn f4 kicking that one away, or the knight lands with check, and this is just really nice for black. There's tons of pressure on the light squares, the pawn structure's a mess, the king is exposed, it's not what you want at all. So without f4 being possible, well, this is why Ding now has to go e4, different kind of pawn structure to cover the square with the rook, but now of course he's closed off his bishop. And Jan now follows up with an exceptional move of pawn to b6, and this is where we get this reaction from the commentary team.
And so he plays b6?
Yeah, he spots it. He spots the queen sacrifice. Are we going to see that happen?
So why is this such an exceptional line? Well, after white recaptures, the idea is not to take here, because once again you can go into this line, and now either b7 or even takes on a7 this time is winning for white. So what's Jan's idea? Well, it's just to recapture with the pawn, leaving the queen to be captured. Why? Because if you take that queen, then there's knight f3 check, and it's an absolute killer. You're forking these two. Now, if the bishop takes, this one recaptures, and it's actually forced mate. There's nothing the king can do to escape. It's completely boxed in, whatever move white chooses to play. And if instead of taking the knight, you move the king, well, then we take with check, and you pick up a rook, and when the smoke clears, black is literally a rook ahead, completely winning. So you cannot take the queen coming back here. So what do we see instead from Ding? Well, an excellent response of knight to b5. Both of these guys just so tactically aware, it's beautiful to watch. And by the way, quick pause, sales pitch coming, although it is a genuine one. So I've been working with AIMCHESS now for 4 or 5 months, and I use it myself most days. It really is great for improving your chess, basically because they'll bring in your own game data. So from Lichess, chess.com, and then they produce this dashboard to show you how to improve the areas you're most weak in, and then you've got puzzles and opening stuff and tactics training stuff. Really good site. So do have a look at it if you get chance. There's a link below and it's completely free to sign up as well. As ever with these things, you get a whole load of free stuff, and then if you want to go premium, get all the bells and whistles, well, that's when you can use the code EPIC at checkout to get a great discount in month 1. So back to this game here. After this move of knight b5, well, you could try and keep the queens on with queen e7, queen e1 is then apparently best, and it's a different game, small edge to white according to the engines. Black according to the engine. But what we see instead is the queens coming off the board. Now we see captures on b5 and bishop h3 from Jan, logical follow-up looking to weaken the light squares. We see captures, rook takes, king g2, the rook drops back, and now rook b5 from Ding. I really like this move, just pinning the knight, creating threats, and here Jan now, he sees a way to steer the way towards a draw. So rook d1 played, knight d5, and he then brings the rook here. Now he is literally threatening mate in 1 because the knight's covering the escape square, but after knight e7 check, well, it's petering out because whichever way the king goes, we see it come this way. This is the follow-up move of rook takes on e5. Now in the game, we see these rooks start checking the king, but if you capture here, well, this is the trick. White then takes this one, black picks up here, and this would have just been another way to make a draw on the board. But what we see instead is this rook checking, and we just see this repeat of moves now. And the reason, by the way, the king doesn't step up here, well, then you can actually take the rook and black's winning because the king's no longer attacking this one. So actually you're in exchange up, and this is an endgame where you're going to suffer as white, possibly even lose. So this was the final moves. The game was drawn. If you enjoyed this one, then do please hit that like button. Consider subscribing to never miss a future video. And if you want to see another exceptional game, Tiebreak 4 between these two guys, check out the video on screen. Thanks for watching and see you soon.